Hey everyone, so here we have our first book of the semester. We're going to be looking at a bunch of books, nearly all of which address pretty much the idea of teaching complex texts to students. And they're all making the argument for teaching texts that are useful to and meaningful to and at the level of the students in our classes. For some authors, the emphasis will be canonical texts. For others, it will simply be texts that challenge students. Each of the authors will agree, however, that the texts we should be dealing with in the classroom are those that require the support of a teacher. And throughout the semester, I will argue to you that if a student can read a text on his or her own, then that text does not belong as part of your classroom instruction. That does not mean such texts are excluded from being a free choice text, for example. It just means that when you are teaching a text to the class, you want to choose a text that challenges students in ways that require your expertise, and this book is designed to help you develop that expertise. Fisher and Fry called this book Rigorous Reading, and I like that title because they're emphasizing that we still must teach reading at the upper grades. And you'll see and hear, and they even note, how direct reading instruction disappears from the standards after second grade. And reading instruction pretty much disappears from the curriculum by the time kids reach middle and high school, just at the moment when the complexity of the text that they are encountering increases. That's a gap in our instruction. And for those of you who have taken EDRD, I'm assuming you have already heard this rant, but for the record, let me state it here. Make no mistake, you are a teacher of reading, and I am a teacher of reading whether I am teaching a 300 level literature class or a graduate class or you guys in this room. Our role as reading instructors never goes away. That said, I don't have hours to spend teaching reading in 402. We got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So what I want to give you in this first little video chat is a sense of how I read, and I consider myself a pretty expert reader. I have a terrible memory, but I'm an excellent reader, and I'm an excellent driver. Actually, that's not true. I'm a shitty driver. Anyway, what I am doing is a kind of think aloud strategy, one I hope you know, and if it's not a strategy you know, it's one we're going to learn and practice this semester. What I've done is take photographs from the pages of my book, and I'm going to talk to you about those various pages and why I selected them and what my annotations look like. Now, this is the second or third time that I've taught this book. Actually, I've taught excerpts of it only, in both last year's 402 and a graduate level special education class that I teach on literacy interventions. So I have marginal comments and underlines that have accrued in this text over a period of 2 or 3 years, which is about how long I've had it. I think it was first published in like 2013. My point, by illustrating the multiple levels of engagement I have had with this text, is to suggest to you that no text is read just once. With every group of students or with every different audience, the meaning that I am trying to make for students changes. It's different for each group and each occasion, because the context in which I am using it is different, and I'm always thinking about the context when I teach a text and when I prepare a text as part of my instruction. So in the subsequent slides, I'm going to show you a particular page and talk a little bit about why I think what I've highlighted or what I put in the margins is meaningful in our current context. And I'm going to expect that you listen to these little chats and you are attentive to them, because I am going to quiz you on the reading. And to be clear, a quiz does more than make sure you read. And I certainly am not suggesting that you won't read, because if that's where you are in your program, that is not gleaning every single thing you can from every course related to teaching that you take, then you don't belong in the program and you certainly don't belong in front of a classroom. Rather, I want to see if you are beginning to pick up on the elements of a chapter that are significant for what we are trying to accomplish in our methods of teaching literature class. Can you separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak? Are you beginning to collect strategies? Are you recognizing ideas that are meaningful for the classroom? And are you connecting what we are reading in the books we will encounter this semester with what you have learned so far in the program? Quizzes are designed to show me how you are making those connections, how you are using that prior knowledge, how you are gathering new information. Only with that knowledge can I begin to direct you in the appropriate ways towards developing the skills that will make you the outstanding teacher I know you can be. So let's take a look at what I've been thinking about while I have been reading Chapter 1 of Rigorous Reading. There are a number of important foundational points made in the opening page or two of this chapter. For example, immediately they begin to discuss the importance of transferring information or learning or knowledge from one occasion to the next and one course to the next. And I would add, from inside the classroom to outside the classroom. Only when we see that transference have we been successful in teaching our students. If learning is a one-shot deal, if it is one and done, then we've wasted our time and their time. So reminding ourselves and reminding our students of the value of learning, of the value of the content we are teaching them beyond the moment is essential. And when we look at your lesson plans in this program, we're trying to see that you are making all of their learning purposeful. Now, at the bottom of this page, oh, there's my arrows. My arrows are flying in from everywhere. They talk about intentional instruction. And just above that, they talk about too little or too much teaching. And these two ideas are related. Too little teaching assumes that students have the requisite skills, the prior knowledge, the schema required to complete a particular task, whether that is doing an activity or reading a text. One reason we have you unpack the standards is because there are a lot of broad terms in the standards, and when we unpack them, we recognize that they contain a variety of skills that have to be taught and have to be scaffolded before students can perform more sophisticated tasks. We might ask a student to analyze something, but what does that mean? What are the steps that we have to teach in order to ensure a student knows how to analyze? Unless we unpack the skill of analysis and break it into its smaller components, we're not going to necessarily prepare students to analyze. So that's an example of too little teaching. But too much teaching is something that happens a lot when we think about pre-reading activities. Sometimes we load so much information onto students before we get to the text that either we don't have enough time to delve into the text or into something that students particularly care about, or the students are sick of the text by the time we start reading it. So finding that sweet spot, that delicate balance, is an important skill we have to develop. And so much of what we preach each and every course is that we have to know what and how much prior knowledge we have to identify. We have to lay just the appropriate groundwork so that the students who are in our class, the students with the knowledge they bring, are prepared to engage the text that is about to confront them. Now, I'm not going to get into a long harangue about Common Core and the Colorado Academic Standards. Suffice to say, and you've probably heard this from others in the program, in English education we are big supporters of the standards. At the same time, you will hear from people inside and outside education about the standards and about testing, and those are two different things. I always advise anybody who has a gripe with the standards to go and look at the actual standards, because one of the points they make is a point that Fisher and I've highlighted it here. The standards are not meant to dictate how students are taught or the texts that are used to teach them. The standards identify the skills students need to master. When we talk about outcomes of instruction, we mean the learning students gain from the instruction teachers provide. But how you provide it and the texts that you use to provide that learning are up to you as a teacher. The evidence outcomes are the learning that you can prove your students have at some level mastered. In the same way we assess you as developing, proficient, or advanced, so you will assess your students. The standards also make clear that teachers are the expert. This point will come up again. Hang on, I got a little bullet flying in here. There we go. So this point will come up again later in the chapter when the emphasis becomes the role of the teacher to model and guide students in employing the skills and the strategies they need to make meaning in the world, both as text creators and text consumers. In other words, as readers and writers. If you don't believe me, here's what you can find on the Common Core site. See? Look what it says. The frequently asked question, do the standards tell teachers what to teach? And the answer is, the teachers know best what works in the classroom. These standards establish what they need to learn, but not how you should teach. So anybody who has a gripe with how the standards are being implemented need to look at the school, not at the standards themselves. Okay? Good. Let's move on. So the next thing that I was really interested in this chapter had to do with scaffolding. And by now you should be confident with the definition of scaffolding, even if you're not always 100% sure how to do it or what it looks like. You should at least understand the definition of the term. Fisher and Fry talk about the kinds of tools we have for scaffolding students. The texts we select are one way to scaffold students, and when we talk about text sets this semester, you'll see exactly how that process can work. The skill of questioning is not only the most essential tool we have as teachers, it's also the most difficult to master and to do well. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about strategic questioning. Sure, we can come up with all kinds of questions, a whole list to ask, and we can pose essential questions and identify thematic questions, but that's not using questions to help students make meaning. Too often we get ourselves involved in this question and answer pattern. I ask a question, you answer. I ask another question, you answer. And that's not what we mean when we talk about developing strategic questioning skills. Now, prompts and cues are activities that you use to get students to make sense of a text. You want them to comprehend the text. You want them to analyze the text. You want them to engage with the text. And that's at the heart of what we do in our classrooms. And we must work in a systematic way to move our students along a trajectory of mastery. When we talk about the zone of proximal development, that's what we're getting at. So take a look at these two slides. Oh man, I gotta hit my enter key. Ta-da! Yay. Okay, I like when that works. So this image, see the slide on the left? Oh, it's sort of like not in the whole frame. Well, you can figure out what's going on there. Anyway, it gives you a sense of how students move closer to the target, which is independent practice, what I can do. And in fact, how we develop our lesson plans, the I do, we do, you do model that undergirds what we do in the classroom, well, that's designed to move students along that trajectory towards mastery. So the idea of scaffolding and the zone of proximal development are closely connected. As this little blurb, you see that thing on the right there? The very concept of scaffolding, yada yada, as it explains, essential in scaffolding is the role of the teacher or the competent peer. Oh wait, I'm going to try and use the drawing tool because I don't do really well with that, but I want to show. Let's practice, okay? Look at I'm modeling being a daring person. Blah 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 blah. A teacher or a more competent peer. Oh, that really was useless. I sucked at that. Okay. Well, we'll leave that. We'll make it go away. All right. This is what matters to me. The idea that in our classroom, we have not only ourselves, but we have a classroom of peers that you can use. Students helping students. This matters so much to the way I want us to think about the classroom. The idea of text sets, the idea of students learning collaboratively, and the idea of students working cooperatively. Cooperatively. That's the word. Cooperatively. Okay, cool. Now, I can't remember at this exact moment if you will have read the Louise Rosenblatt essay before or after you look at this little chat, but this notion of matching readers to text and making wise choices is a key to creating that connection between students and literature that she advocates and with which I totally agree. That connection is essential, but one caveat, and this is a point made by people like Kelly Gallagher and Janet Alsup and David Denby in the text we're going to be reading during the semester, and that is, sometimes we have to lead students to a text they might not favor because we understand that there's a connection there that they can't see at the get-go. If all students do is make their own choices, they will always opt for chocolate over broccoli. And what this means for you as a classroom teacher is this. You must know your discipline and you must know your students. The only way to know what your students want to read, what your students are passionate about, what your students are thinking about, what your students feel, is to put the effort in to understand who they are as individuals and who they are as a generation. And that's on you. In terms of all the multitude of books that are out there and stories and poems that students can read, you owe it to yourself to read broadly. But you can't read everything. You have to develop the resources that will allow you to select text for students or direct students to the text that can be meaningful to them. If you want to be an English teacher because there are books you want to teach because you love them so much, oh my God, I want to teach my student this book because I want them to love it the same way I do, lose that idea or drop out of the program. You will be a shitty teacher. The classroom is not about you. The classroom is about the students. You are their resource. You are their facilitator. You are their guide. You are their mentor for engaging with literature. The more you know, the more you read, the more you explore, the better a teacher you will be. On Canvas, you'll find a module with a variety of resources that you can use to locate text by theme or by topic or by period, by region, by genre, by mode, all kinds of ways. I urge you to begin to mess with those resources now. Don't wait until you're in a classroom scrambling to find a particular text for a particular student. Start to look now at the resources we are providing you so that when you are in your own classroom and you do need to find a text on a particular theme or topic or in a particular genre or mode or from a particular place or time, you know where to go and locate one. You might not have a list of possible texts at your fingertips, but you know where you can go to find that perfect text that will speak to that particular student at that exact moment, enabling you to match them with a piece of literature that just might move them to become a reader of great books. But, as Fisher and Fry make clear, choosing a text is a complex process. It has to do with quantitative measures, it has to do with qualitative measures, and it has to do with what you know about the students in your classroom. This chart from page 9 lists the factors of text complexity, and here's why I like it. If you look at the left column, the components that you need to assess in order to decide if a text is appropriate also suggest to you the kinds of things that you're going to need to teach in order to ensure that students can make meaning from the text they read and, therefore, meet the outcomes. In class, you'll be asked to assess text complexity both quantitatively and qualitatively. But for now, just look at what it's asking you to do here. You need to teach meaning and purpose, you need to teach some elements of structure, you need to teach language and conventions, and you need to ensure that students contextualize what they read in terms of background and prior knowledge, their cultural literacy, and their vocabulary. In the grand scheme of a semester or an academic year, that's really not a lot. These are the things that are going to shape your curriculum as you map your way through the school year. And with each unit or each text or each quarter, you select which of these components and their attendant aspects you are going to attend to for that block of time. And given what we've talked about earlier with the trajectory of learning and the scaffolding of students, you'll gradually increase the level of difficulty of the text they work with, the questions you ask, and the activities you ask them to engage in, as well as the assessments you use in measuring their learning. Things get harder as the semester progresses. Common sense. I want you to take a look at the first section of this chart, levels of meaning and purpose, and the second aspect, which is figurative language. Now think about your introduction to literature class, or your English 195, or whatever you took, maybe AP or IB, and recall all the literary devices you had to memorize and identify. The thing is, unless you are going to be an English major, which ones do you really need to know? Becoming a successful teacher is recognizing your audience and exactly what they need to know about the content you are teaching. So I want to go to this slide. See that? If it's working right, this video should take you to a discussion of the 8 essential types of figurative language that human beings need to know to live in the world. It's from this teacher named Mr. Soto, and he's got a terrific YouTube site, and he makes these videos that are unpolished and kind of clunky, but they're very endearing. And they're really valuable, and you can get to his YouTube link from this video, provided it works. The hardest thing for us to remember is this: they are not we. The students in our classes are not going to want to pursue English as their major. Ask them the first day of class. You'll maybe get one hand if you're lucky. They're not all in love with books. They have their own interests, they have their own ideas, they have their own passion. Our aim is to give them the knowledge they need to enjoy what they read, to make sense of what they read, to connect what they read to their own lives, and to think about the ideas that great books ask us to ponder. But we have to decide what skills they need in order to be able to do that. Do they need to know metonymy and synecdoche in order to do that? Must they be able to identify an anapest or a trochee in order to enjoy poetry? I'm not convinced that they do. What they need is a sense of how literature works, a sense of how a writer elicits a response from us and the tools at their disposal to do so. How does a writer get me to feel fear or joy or pleasure? And they need a language to use in order to talk about literature. If they decide to pursue English, if they decide to sit through the AP exam, if they decide to go on and get a PhD, then there's a discourse community they will join, and a vaster set of terms and jargon they will have to learn. But for now, we just want them to enjoy reading a good book. Fisher and Fry discuss Louise Rosenblatt on this page, and they give you a sense of the kinds of text that those of us who embrace reader response think should be included in the classroom. And I want to focus on the last bullet in this list, which reads, interrupt gender, racial, or ability stereotypes. See, I got that there. That is what I'm looking to do by tapping into the resource that our colleague and classmate Tim Hernandez has developed. Watch me hit this. There we go. Okay. His identity-based education curriculum emerges out of a reader response ethos that believes students must see themselves in the text, which is bullet 3, which you can't see anymore, as well as those different from them, which is bullet 7, which you also can't see anymore. With these texts, we can begin to examine the ways that we can interrupt or realign or ask students to reconsider how they think about gender, race, ability, class, any of these various markers of identity. At the same time, there are classic texts, canonical texts, texts that seem dated but also address very contemporary issues. However, in many cases, they address them more deeply. They address them in more complex ways. They challenge students on multiple levels to think about big ideas, big problem, and bigger world than the one they inhabit. And we can use the kind of text Tim has identified on his site, and those are the texts I've asked you each to select one of, as a way to introduce students to begin to think about these topics and themes. However, we can also try to move them to texts that expand their world and move them farther along their zone of proximal development. Texts where the issues and questions raised are multiple, philosophical, and sometimes unanswerable. Those are the arguments that Alsop and Denby will be making. It's a belief I share, and it's the reason why I choose Hard Times as the text we will all read at the beginning of the semester. With Dickens, my aim is to show you how these very contemporary issues are also the topic of books from a century or more ago, and they tell stories that resonate with now, with this moment, but they do it in this glorious prose with these most wonderful characters who teach us how to live and not live in the world. And I think they're better. I think they're better written. I think they're more meaningful than some of the contemporary texts we're giving students to read because they are so close to the student's world or they're so accessible. Our job is to help make these challenging texts with these wonderful characters more accessible to students. The bottom line is this: in order to engage with literature in a meaningful way, we must have a set of strategies. On the bottom of this page and onto the next, Fisher and Fry list comprehension strategies students need to master and you need to teach. In the same way that we unpack the standards, we have to unpack these strategies. If you say to me, I'm going to use the questioning strategy, I'm going to ask you, what specific strategy do you plan to use? They list 6 strategies here, and they say, and say that in your quiver of teaching tools, you have 5 activities for each strategy. That's a total of 30 activities that you can spread out and repeat and incorporate into your instruction over the course of a semester. They can become your go-to strategies. Which one you choose might depend on the students in your classroom, the mood of the students on that particular day, the content you are teaching, the text you are reading. The key is you've got some strategies already set up. In the lesson plans that you develop this semester, you're not allowed to say, I will ask questions, or students will summarize, or the class will connect. No, you have to walk me through the exact activity you're going to use to teach that strategy. Now, as you progress in your career and you begin to use more compact lesson plans, then you might just say, students will summarize, and you'll make a game day decision on which strategy will work best. But that's not the case now. During the semester, we will seek to fill our pedagogical quivers with a variety of strategies that we can use to develop our students' ability to comprehend literature. And, there we go. Can you think of examples of activities or pedagogies that fit into these 6 categories that you've seen in your classes? Have you seen them from Stacy? Have you seen them from Simon? Have you seen them from Courtney? Have you seen them from your host teacher? This is how you begin to acquire some of those strategies, and that's what we're going to talk about in class this semester. So, that's it. 1 chapter down. Now, my plan is not to make a chat for every reading, although I will use chats like these to raise significant points that I want you to ponder before class. And for this little video chat, I kind of first spoke the comments into my voice-to-text converter, and then I'm reading them as I go through the slides. That was to impress you. Notice how impressive it is, because I keep fucking up throughout anyway. I can plan and it screws up anyway. Life is chaos. But most of the chats henceforth will be winging it, a little bit more impromptu, so perhaps a little less coherent. But what I wanted to do here is model for you how I read a text I'm teaching. I find the key ideas that are relevant to where I see us going in this class at this stage of the semester. Now remember, I teach some of these same ideas in a special education class to people who are not English language arts teachers, which means I select different areas to address. I also don't make them video chats because I don't like them as much. I make them read my handwritten stuff. Anyway, or my typed out stuff. Anyway, the quiz that I'm going to give you on this chapter is designed to see if you recognized other important but more tangential points raised in the chapter, content you need in order to make sense of where we are going. Think of the quiz stuff as more quantitative notions and the chats as more qualitative. Or, as Mr. Gradgrind might say, facts versus imagination. If you don't know what that means, start reading Hard Times. But your responsibility is this. You must identify and raise in class the points in the text that I do not address but that matter to you. And so we shall proceed.